basically every single thing I've ever done that's been co-designed with experts by experience has been 100% immeasurably better, far better than when I've sat in a meeting with other organisations, the professionals. And I don't ever know how to express that to people, but not only has it always been a positive experience, but it's just transformational for the work that you do. But I don't quite know what the magic ingredients are. But if I could find a way to express that properly to a board, I would just say you're just going to be 100 times better, basically.
Most organisations maybe also have like a pathway to employment for people that use their services, or like would also be thinking about how you could increase representation on the staff team. And I think, you know, it says something, like if your board looks like the people who use the service, or, you know, have backgrounds similar to the people that use the service, like that sends a very strong message about like what's valued and like whose voices are valued to the rest of like the clients or beneficiaries using that service. And I know that, yeah, we've heard a lot of feedback in terms of like our routes to employment, that if the board doesn't look like that, like it doesn't really add up if you're saying like we'd like you to enter into leadership positions.
Big things for me is the authenticity that having somebody on the board making their direct observations, experiences, views known, and avoids what I've faced many times where views I have go to a committee and are either misrepresented, miscommunicated, or redacted. So the bad bits left out, which are the relevant bits. So for me, the big issue is the authenticity, that lived experience is getting heard or visually represented by a person, ideally, to the board. And I think that's a key aspect. But I take on board what the previous person said. It has to be relevant and up to date.
It's about the standpoint, isn't it? And it's not that we can't all try and empathise and think about different standpoints, but there's no doubt like that I see the standpoint of a woman and a woman with children when I'm sat in a room and someone says something, I think, well, how's that going to work for childcare? Like when you have a certain experience in life, it gives you a standpoint, and other people don't necessarily see it because it's not their standpoint. So, I mean, I just think that's why, one of the main reasons why you want people there. And I appreciate that people's experiences are different and they haven't necessarily been in that particular service, but it's another standpoint, making people just sit up and see another perspective, and the key perspective, because after all, if you're running a service, people experiencing homelessness, then that's the kind of one of the key perspectives. So I'd say that's about that.
Like the value almost is that I think when there is like you're trying to survive as an organisation, you're trying to, I don't know, create strategies and plans about how things go forward. I think essentially everything sort of boils down about how impactful it's got to be on the people that you're working with as well. So I think having that perspective there should be valued just as a checker, I guess, to see that actually like the empathy that people have when you have had that first-hand experience has got to be a lot more in depth. So I think anything that is being designed or created at a strategic level should always be considered for how that is directly got to affect or have an impact on people as well. So I think that's, for me, that's what sort of boils down to, I guess, but it's how that actually happens.
I think that, you know, when we're talking about designing services and intention, I think humility needs to be a part of that, and being willing to be effective, you know, be willing to understand the effectiveness of the service. So I think that it's almost like, just if you're talking about service improvement, then you always have to be keeping open-minded and understanding that you don't know all the answers. Doesn't matter how much learning we've done, doesn't matter formal learning, doesn't matter how much experience we have, we don't know everybody's experience. So it's almost like, you know, it's an acknowledgement of humility within the organisation.
Sometimes people have just such too low expectations of people with lived experience, and any role is about getting the right person for the role. So if you're setting up if you want someone on a board, that's about finding someone who has, is right for the board. That means also people still obviously need training and support and all of that stuff as well. But I think sometimes like organisations just pick someone because it's sort of tokenistic without really thinking whether that person has the confidence or really just the right set of skills to be able to contribute once they've had the training and stuff like that. And I think really it's like anything else, like there's the right person, and people need to have more faith. There's a lot of people with lived experience, all with different kind of skills, and it's about finding people who are kind of up for it and ready for it, and the right people for those roles.
I think sometimes board cultures, it's that balance between having, like, you speak about finance, you speak about risk, you speak about strategy as well, and I think it's where what somebody as an individual would bring to that table and where their skill set is, I think, instead of being labelled as somebody with lived experience or whatever. It's like on an individual basis as well. So I think how that is brought in and considered is an important part as well, because it's like somebody with lived experience and it's based on, 10 years ago when somebody went through a bit of a tough time. So it's different, I think, in looking at how you can sort of value like different types of experiences as well, not just like what's the culture and what's the discussions around in the board, where it's really valuing like sort of insights around impact and what's happening on the ground. And
being a tokenism of like sometimes people being on the boards for a really long time but never actually being like on a committee or like having any like real power. And then when I've spoken to trustees with lived experience, they've sometimes said they're only there to like be the voice of the service user, but that might have been like a really long time ago, so they're not really actually like the voice of a current service user, but people will kind of look to them as like that voice, which so I think there's like lots of stuff mixed up about what we mean by like someone bringing their lived experience. Like, are we looking for them to look at that in the round and to kind of like bring that perspective and that like diversity of thought and type of knowledge or cultural awareness or different things like that, which isn't tied to like a specific user involvement. So I would say to those organizations, like, have people on the board, but you also need to be having like service user forums.
We've had difficulty in, ever really getting anybody to that point. So we have a forum that kind of runs alongside, and board members attend the forum, but it does feel a little bit like it's a sort of a step down, and it's not quite the equivalent of the board. So we are, I would say, struggling here in our organisation. But it's how you define somebody with lived experience. I mean, it could mean anything, and different people interpret that different ways depending on their agenda, I guess.
But really, we need to be supporting people to move into like a chair position or to sit on like the various different like working groups and to like have real power in those spaces, as opposed to just like being a member of the board, which I've been on boards where I didn't feel like I was very effective. So like how you build the skills. So people have talked to me about like buddying systems. I think there's more and more like trustee trainee programs going on. But I did have some people have talked about like board shadowing in order to like learn the skills to then be really effective. But I had some conversations with people who were like, you can't have like a second tier citizenship role on the board. Like you're either in it or not, like you either got that power or not. So I think it just throws up like, lots more questions, but like 100% committed that people should be there.
I don't know, what are they willing to change? Like if they really want to be inclusive, like the pace, the knowledge, if somebody's maybe not had that type of experience, it's just, I think, how sort of willing boards are to sort of accommodate a wide range of needs as well. So I think definitely people should be on boards, but I think it's that tokenistic element as well that sort of really stands out for me, is that people know they should have people there and they bring people in, but sometimes, and what I've seen is that people can have a bad experience. So I think it needs to be, looking at the board cultures and how that sort of operates as well.
I have seen situations where like strategic conversations about like the overall direction of an organization can like become bogged down in quite operational conversations. And that is like a really difficult transition for like anyone to make, like whether you're doing frontline work or what have you, to like think about like the bigger picture and priorities. Again, I don't think it's like insurmountable. It's about how you chair, how you support, how you prepare people for that space. But I think that is where like issues come up and where people feel like they're not being listened to, which may or may not be the case. But I think often it is like a mismatch about like the scope of what's being talked about and what people are bringing to that space. So that's like a challenge.
Recruiting the right people with lived experience to boards, because there's plenty of people with lived experience who are reflective and like fully able to kind of engage in a board that does all the things that are suggested, because actually I personally think boards should do that for everybody anyway. They're far too complex, they're far too many papers, they're completely inaccessible for everyone. But yeah, so I completely agree, all those things do need to take place, preparation, you know, and thinking about language and stuff like that. But it's also about making sure that whoever's recruited is already like aware and ready to go into an environment where you're talking in a little bit of an abstract way about things that are actually sometimes personal. And you know, so I think it's a mixture of those things for me. But I also think from what you've said, we need to train boards, don't we? Because it's also about a power dynamic.
If we want to like make spaces more inclusive, the times that I've seen things work is when someone on the board has taken it upon themselves to like become a buddy and be an ally in that space and put a huge amount of investment into meeting with people beforehand, going over papers, like explaining the processes. And like for bigger organizations, they should resource that and there should be a plan around it. For lots of smaller organizations, and like, you know, loads of people on boards are on like multiple boards and like really struggle for time, I think it's very easy to say like boards aren't doing it well, but not actually think about like whether there's been a plan to resource it and to support the existing members to do it well. Because I think there is a desire, in my experience anyway, but it just does come down to like resourcing it and doing it effectively.
I was reading the other day for a charity outside work, if people are going to be trustees, there's lots of regulations in place, and it's really, you have to go through quite a big process for somebody with a criminal record to become a trustee of a charity. And it's not impossible, but it's a process. I was reading a blog the other day where you have to go through a big application process and you really need to support the person because it's quite impersonal and quite unpleasant, apparently, and quite exposing. So criminal records is a genuine challenge, I think. It's a real challenge anyway, if people do.
Just a quick one I hadn't really thought about is quite often board meetings are in working days, and there seems to be this lack of understanding that quite a lot of people with lived experience actually have jobs and work as well. So quite often they're inaccessible in terms of like times of the day, because when I'm asked to, you know, get someone with lived experience to sit on a board, people have jobs and they can't attend. So then people think, well, people don't want to be involved, and it's not that at all. It's just there's no flexibility in terms of doing it out of work hours.